Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. I am your host, Dr. Owen Campbell. I'm the owner of Simplify Motion Physical Therapy in Phoenix, Arizona. And with me today is, as always, is Dr. Brian Wolf. He's the owner of Evolution PT and Fitness. And Brian, I'm happy to bring you on, man. We're going to be talking about keeping our mental space in the positive. Can't wait to hear what you have to say about it. You've been doing it for a while.
I am all about the mental space.
for
Let's
those of
see.
you for those of you that don't know, Brian is not the nice sauna zen garden
No,
person and all that. So when I talked to him about the topic today, he was like, okay, I've done that, all right.
it'll be funny. I do meditation and yoga, a cold bath, and yeah,
I
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I also have emotions.
yeah. Exactly, exactly.
All right. So as the show title goes, um, what I am looking at, and this is something that I've come up on in the last probably 2 weeks, is that I've had some very different days and things that have either happened with family or things that have happened in business. And I found myself in these kind of tale of two cities type of days where I can be really down, really limited, the sort of energy is gone, right? And then there's other days, man, where something happens right. I got a new client call me, or something where I land a new patient, right? And then, oh my God, everything is bright roses and everything, right? So what I wanted to talk about today is how do you keep yourself on that sort of not high mental thing, because you can never be high emotionally the whole time. That would be exhausting in itself and probably not healthy anyway. But how do we keep ourselves to a level that it's good for our business, and something that I think that we can all relate to?
Yeah, man. I think there's a couple different things to unpack there, and I like that we're doing this today because I mentioned the first one was I think reading books is a really good way to like help. You talked about feeding the motor, right? It's like feeding your brain, feeding that ambition. There's particularly for men, to get a little deep, particularly for men, there's this feeling of like, if I'm not providing, if I'm not doing something more, if I'm not doing something of substance, right? Like I'm a failure. Just real talk, right? Like I know how that feels because I felt that where I'm like, I'm failing,
100%. Yeah.
you know? And so I think that there's an aspect of that where that can be daunting, right? I love that book, The Gap in the Gain, that I talked about. And it talks a lot about looking at the ideal and not looking back on where you came from. And I do love the concept. I think it's important to look at the ideal to drive you and push you, because there is times where you can get complacent, which can put you in a dark place too, funny enough. Because this feeling of like, well, I just gotta like to your point. I mean, we've talked about this like I'm pretty sure like a numbers game or like just time. And sometimes it's like, oh, but like how much more time? Like what you know what I mean? Like, there's that feeling that way. So it's I think that's a challenge. It's a matter of focusing on where you're headed in the future and what you're building, but
Mhm.
also appreciating the back of where you've come from.
Yeah, and I think that the big thing to set up here too is that the effect on business when you're having a bad day versus a good day, and that can be big, that can really hit all scales. So a CEO, if they're having a good day versus a bad day, can really affect maybe some big decisions they make or how they present themselves in negotiations, all the way down to someone like me where I'm a solopreneur, and it can affect me in, do I go to that doctor's office and drop off my cards, or do I just kind of go home and play video games? Or do I cancel that last patient because, man, I just don't want to be working anymore? Or do I follow up text? So there are these different kind of manifestations of your mood that will have hard lines, and you can see them in your business. So these are some of the things that I wrote down where, on a good day I'll send an extra text, I'll talk to someone who I met at a networking meeting, I'll do all that. And on a bad day, I'm not dropping those cards off, man. I'm going
Yeah,
home, I'm getting a cheeseburger, and I'm playing video games, right? All the unhealthy coping mechanisms of a bad
the comfort.
day.
Well, I think to your point, you go towards the point of comfort, right? If you ever read anything from like Jocko Willenick and those guys, right? They always talk about like move towards the uncomfortable, move towards the this, right? And like I get it. Those guys are awesome and like, total like driven, and I love it. And but there's also moments of these weaknesses too, right? And I was funny, we're just talking about this because we're trying to institute something within our business that's a bit of a challenge that we're trying to figure out. And I can understand that like there's some failure involved in it. And so far, it really hasn't gone as well as we would have hoped. And so the people implementing it, what their natural reaction is let me see if I just stop doing it, right? I'll just stop doing it, and then the pain will go away, right? Where in reality, it's like, well, that's not really a good solution either. So the aspect of like, like, listen, to your point of like, have I had the bad day and been like, oh, forget it. Like, let's just go do what I want to do that's fun, right? Like, of course, you have to have recharge moments. In fact, even the people who are the most brilliant at anything, right, have to have those recharge times. I think when it becomes toxic, when it becomes a problem, is if it's being like, I'm just not going to figure that problem out. You get to that headspace of like, it just doesn't work. It's not going to work for us, right? Like that's the issue. I think what you have to think about is, all right, here's something we can implement. We know there's a way to do it. How can we figure this out? Maybe today's not the day, but what's the due date? Like, what's the time that we need to figure this process out, and how do we implement this together, and how do we do it all together, right? And then, and again, if you're a solopreneur, to your point, if you're like, hey, I'm having a bad day, I need to reset. All right, tomorrow is going to be a new day, and I'm going to rock it tomorrow. And then you're just using it to recharge. I think that can be really effective.
Yeah, I think you hit on a good point there where it's not a bad thing to go and do those things that help you recharge. And I love that strategy, man, that like I have to set these few goals that I will hit on this day, this week, this month. And yeah, if you don't get them all done in a day, if it's a monthly goal, then okay, you got tomorrow, right? Maybe you wake up early the next day. There's all these different strategies that I think any person who's been in business for a long time, I mean, just any person really, but when we're talking about a business, can find systems and processes that help keep them on their bad days up, right? And I mean, sometimes on their good days down, right? I'm sure we've all worked with, and God, probably Brian, my wife and your wife would say the same thing about us, is sometimes we're way too up, right? We're let's do this, let's do that, let's do that, right? And you need these kind of systems to kind of bring you to where you need to be. So I'm always interested because your organization's bigger, obviously, than mine. I've been in some big organizations, but I mean massive organizations. I was wondering what the guy who went from entrepreneur to, okay, now I got to make some systems here. Now I got to make a business that runs when I'm maybe having a bad day or not. What have you put in place in evolution to kind of keep it so that it's a little bit bulletproof to how the owner's feeling?
That's a great question, man. I think the toughest part of that is like when you're a solopreneur, if you're having a down day, like in theory the whole company's down because
Hmm.
you're the whole company, right? But the good
Yep.
news is like if you're backing up, like you're back up, like the whole company's back up, right? Like it's almost a little more volatile in that way, right?
Yep.
The difference is I think that is important, and like you and I have stressful stuff that's going on, right? And we can have stuff that happens, but if you wear it on your sleeve or you take it out, like I recognize that one of the things that I've recognized with the way that I deal with stress sometimes it's not a good thing, and is that I'll like start to lash out a little bit and like start to be kind of aggressive and angry. And if that happens, that's bad, obviously. And if I'm doing that to my family, obviously that's horrible. And if I'm doing that to my staff, and that's me being in kind of the wrong mindset. And it's the way that I think really what it comes down to is there's a lot of systems in place that you need to put in place for like leadership. And I think that's what makes the leadership so important because it means that when you're not in that good mindset, you can go home and the machine will still operate without you. Right. So
Mhm.
I think that having other systems in place that make your employees happy and there's leaders that are in place that if you're just not in a good mindset and you just have to take off and get out of the office, like it's gonna be okay. Right. Everything's gonna be
So,
fine.
so you're saying, your main strategy is to train the people under you to be able to offset you, right? And maybe not so much offset you like have to be your babysitter, right?
Yeah.
But make it so that they have a good understanding of their role in the organization. If you're unable to be at a certain thing, they can take over for you, things like that, where you
Yeah.
can kind of leverage the team aspect of a bigger organization.
Yeah, because I also think that that actually helps me be in a good mindset right? Like when I can talk to my leadership
Yeah, yeah.
team and be like, hey, sometimes I don't need to be here and I trust you guys, and they're pushing back on me. Like now I only have two people that I have to work with, or three people or four people that I have to work with in that versus like your entire staff. And so if you find yourself in a negative mindset and you're kind of like lashing out all over the place, obviously that's a huge problem. But I think when it comes down to, the way to make sure that, again, I think it's also taking care of yourself, making sure that you're in the best mindset, identifying. Like, I think that's something that I've gotten better at is identifying, okay, this is not good what you're doing. So you need to make sure this is better, even if it's to a giant frustration. And then also taking some frustrations and being like, okay, you guys got to handle that. I can't handle all of these things, right? So there's a certain amount of that as well. So it's I think kind of to summarize it, it's having really good leadership in place so that you can lean on them in times when you're just not 100%. And it's also making sure that you're communicating with all of your staff as best you can when you are at 100% and making sure that they're seeing the good stuff, and shielding them a little bit from the bad stuff to a degree. Like sharing some, I think, is important. So I think it's just a combination of those two things is kind of the systems we've put in place.
And that's good to know. And I mean, that's the benefit of having a big company is that you can systematize stuff, right? And I find that with me as a solopreneur, you kind of have to go back, and I mean, you probably do this anyway. Just it's just good healthy habit. But even back to the basics of how to kind of quote unquote biohack your mood, right? So a big thing for me I've noticed is that when I am exercising, right, either resistance training, running, going for a walk, whatever it is, when I am doing that, I tend to be a lot more level, right? And I think that if you look at leaders across any business, almost all of them, I don't want to say they're all in shape because they're not, but they have something physical that they can do that can kind of bring them to kind of more of a homeostasis. And I think that exercising is good. And the other thing that's that old kind of biohack is gratitude journals, right? So I found this little app, and I forgot the name of it too. I can look it up on my phone. There's a billion of them, and all it does is every day it pops up and it says, "Have you written your gratitude today?" Right? And you kind of open it up and you say, "Yes, I'm happy that my kid got a ribbon in swim class." Right? And what that does mentally is it takes you out of this, "Oh my God, everything's coming at me. What are all these different things I have to do?" And it kind of goes like, "Oh, it's not that bad." Right? Like there's something that a lot of people would love to have, right? A kid who just got a ribbon in swim class, right? And you can say, "Oh, okay, I've been focusing on one point of my life a lot and taking all of my value from that and realizing that there's all this other good stuff." So I think that if I need a quick pick me up, that's my kind of quick hack, right? And then kind of the long term thing, what you just said is kind of making sure that you have a system approach, right? And for me, it's going back to that whole it's a numbers game, right? The big thing for me right now when I'm starting a business is how's my business doing? Am I getting anywhere? I had 4 referrals last month and I had 2 the previous month. That means I'm doubling every month. And of course, obviously, that's bad statistical analysis. But with small numbers, you can see big changes. And then mentally, you have to do that. And obviously, the negative can happen too, right? So, one of the big things that helps me is just realizing that if I'm down a month, it's just a numbers game. I just got to meet a bunch more people. I just got to talk to a bunch more people. Not enough people know me. And at least for a solopreneur, that's probably one of the biggest headaches, and one of the ways that I at least try and fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, kind of going back to the biohacking thing. One thing I've done, the working out has been huge, and I would encourage anybody just working out in the mornings is really helpful because it just sets up the whole rest of the day to be way more mentally positive, even if you don't want to go. Because I had it happen this weekend where yesterday I just was like not on my A game when I was working out, but just like the going through the motions of it and like the endorphins that happen, and like feeling and sweating, like I found myself being like I feel better, right? Like I just feel better. So I think exercise has always been a good outlet for a stress reliever for me. Actually, one of the ones was like cold showers. That seriously actually did help. I think there's a lot of like to your point about like the kumbaya that is me. Like like I think there's a big push out there for like every morning, what you should do is write down your 3 things and then take a cold shower and then meditate and then exercise. It's like, all right, well, at a certain point, like you got to start the workday, right?
Yeah,
Like,
3 hours later,
yeah, exactly,
when your
right? So
kids
like,
are yelling at you.
exactly. So I think what we're saying is like I love that you said like this gratitude journal helped me a ton, and like this like exercising. It's like there's a whole list of biohacking things out there. Like pick something. Like for me, the cold shower works. It's 1 minute. You have to breathe. So like you have to breathe through it. Like you have no choice. So like to do the cold plunging thing, I actually found it from a stress and anxiety perspective. It helped a lot. So like I found that I did that, and like that was helpful. I don't do it every morning anymore, but like I used to, and like I was trying it out a little bit, and it totally works. So it's like if you're like just like oh you're just not in a good headspace, like sometimes that does work. That just like to drastically shock your body real quick. So that's what kind of exercise is to a certain degree. So I think, and you go back to your numbers game and in that aspect, a lot of times it's like kind of goes back to that gap and gain conversation. It's like, what do we do this month? How are we doing? Like, are we moving forward? Like, again, like you don't look day by day, you can look month by month, year by year. And if you start looking at more of a macro scale, it can kind of settle you down a little bit because it's like, especially it's like, again, I've heard somebody, am I having a bad day or am I having a bad life? Right? Am I having a
Oh,
bad
that's good.
week or am I having a bad life? Right?
Yeah.
Like to your point about your kids, like I try and do that all the time and I'm like, okay, like you're okay. Right. Like it can help kind of like really peel you back in that way real fast.
And that's actually, it's funny you say that because I literally did this yesterday where I said, I don't know where I'm at. And I just did the math on every month how much I made. And then I thought back, and thankfully I saved this on my notes app on my phone. But I look back and I said, where do I want to be in a year? Right. And I was on target. Right. And I know in a business like yours, you have, people who it's their main job to make sure every day you're on target. But for a solopreneur, sometimes you kind of forget you got to like fill in the Excel spreadsheet every few weeks. And I didn't in a month. Right. And then I looked at it and then I zoomed out. I took a much bigger view, like you said, what's bad day or bad life. And I realized, oh, I'm actually right where I was desperate to be 8 months ago. Right. And you look back and you think, okay, what would 8 months ago me have said to me now? They would have been like, oh, kick ass, we'll get explicit on this stuff anyway. Kick ass. Like, this is great. Right. Whereas my new frame is, well, I didn't make a few $1,000s this month. So that's not as good as last month. Whereas talk to your old me and you're just like, oh, I'm actually doing okay.
Yeah. I think kind of what you're saying is like, numbers can both set you free and also bring you anxiety. Right. So it's like to that point of if I'm staring at every single thing that's going on, how many patient visits we did, how many, how much do we get per visit? Like, what are we doing with fitness numbers? Where are we? You could drive yourself bonkers. So it's good to be doing these look backs on a regular basis and be like, okay, we're doing okay. You know what I mean? Like, because I think it also shows progress. I think one of the things, and we chatted about this in the pre-show, so I'm not sure we're going to get to another question, but one of the things that I've also recognized is if I feel like I'm not being productive, one hack that I always went back to, and I love this Alex Ramosi quote because I think it was really good. He was like, if you're not doing $1 million in business, you should all be focusing on advertising. So
Yeah.
for me, the one major thing that I've realized is I'm like, okay, if I'm not being productive, what can I do right now? If I'm like scrolling on my phone or like thinking about the cheeseburger, like to your point about like the doctor's office, like it's like I can work on advertising. I can work on advertising right now because 4 hours when you work on advertising, you realize that is a ton of freaking time, like a per day. So 4 hours, I try and say like, all right, like if I'm not being productive right now, that was a big eye opener for me because I can focus on the advertising side of things.
Well, that's good to hear because your business is scheduled to do $1 million in revenue, and mine is not, and we're both focusing on the same thing, right? We're both just grinding marketing. So any solopreneur all the way up to multi-clinic listening to this, you know, just think about marketing. It's all about marketing in
Yeah,
the end.
yeah. I mean, that's what I feel like the one thing that's really helped me grow our business consistently, and it's because we've created a systematic approach to marketing that I think is accumulating more patients. You can, it's what Alex Rosy has a line. It's very hard to be poor with leads knocking down your door, right? Like it's just
Yep.
the reality of that situation, right? And so, going back to something, and I meant to say it when you said it was, I wish that when I was a solopreneur, when I only had a couple employees, that I had created more and more systems as though I was going to be bigger because of that. Because I feel like not you don't feel like you're running and putting out fires as much.
Mhm.
But I also think part of that being nimble was also what like made us like ruthlessly effective in the beginning,
Mhm.
particularly like during something like COVID, right? Like when there were some things going crazy. But I think that the bigger thing is that I've always come back to is like if you can really focus on, getting more clients all the time, it's really hard to not be successful. And so because now we talked about this in the pre-show, you get more reps, right? Like you
Mhm.
just get more reps. Like if my offer sucks, I can offer it to 100 people. Well, if you only have 10 leads, you can't offer it to 100 people, right? So like if you have 150 leads, you can offer it to 100 people. So it's like, you want to understand your market and what's going on and how that's working. And I think that's where being good at advertising and attracting clients is really, really important.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, A, just as a disclaimer, obviously, if you, a lot of people listening to this are healthcare professionals, if there is a need that you need to see somebody and talk about this, please do. But to bounce back off of that, one of the things that we are doing, and we mentioned in previous episodes, is that we have the front row, back row mentorship available. And we're going to put it in the show notes on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And in there, we've actually dropped a few new things now, new things for our mentorship members. All of them are free members because it's free to get in. We're going to start putting more things on there. And the last few ones have been marketing related, I believe, Brian. Haven't you thrown a few in there?
Yeah, man. Everything that we've got in there right now, to Owens, this is exactly how we designed this. I said, what should we put in this school? And Owen said, anything that makes me more money. And so if anybody who's listening to this wants to make more money, you should join the school group because quite frankly, what's going to happen, we're not charging anything because we're trying to figure out if it works, and it will work. It's a matter again, getting our reps in. So once we get our reps in, we know the offer works, we're going to sell it. So jump in now.
I love the aggressive confidence. All right. And with that, we are off, Brian. Have a good Thursday.
You too, man.
See you.
Yeah.